Welcome to the Voice of Counseling, presented by the American Counseling Association. This program is hosted by Dr. S. Kent Butler. This week's episode is Distance Counseling and Supervision, a guide for mental health clinicians, and features Dr. Jennifer Nivin Williamson and Dr. Dan G. Williamson.
Welcome to the Voice of Counseling from the American Counseling Association. I'm Dr. S. Kent Butler, and joining us today are Doctors Jennifer Nivin Williamson and Daniel G. Williamson, both co-authors, co-editors of the contributing book from ACA, Distance Counseling and Supervision, a guide for mental health clinicians. So Daniel is a co-chair for the ACA, or past co-chair for the ACA Policies and Bylaws Committee, and is a current member of the ACA International Committee. He is on faculty at Capella as a core faculty member and a co-founder of PAX Consulting and Counseling, PLLC. Jennifer is also a co-editor and contributing author to the book and is also on faculty at Capella. She has been the past co-chair for the ACA Ethics Committee and current member of the ACA Ethics Appeal Committee. And so with that, I want to bring both of them on and see how they're doing. Jennifer, Daniel, what's going on?
We're just happy to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you for being a part of today's podcast. It's exciting to see you all. So can you kind of talk a little bit about what got you all so excited about contributing this piece to ACA and to our members of council?
Yes, thank you. So it's exciting. We are old timers, and we were in very traditional settings. And in about 2017, I was co-chairing ACA Ethics, and Dan was co-chairing Policies and Bylaws. And we were in an ACA town hall meeting.
Okay.
And a lot of questions started coming up about the use of technology in counseling. And so with ACA Ethics, we were saying we defer to the state licensure board because most of the questions we were getting were legal questions.
Mm-hmm.
And the person asking the question was very angry. And he said, "I'm with the state licensure board, we defer to you." And so someone else stood up. It was about 300 people in the room, and they said, "We defer to you as well." And so we realized that we were kind of playing a game of hot potato professionally with who was going to make this decision. This is pre-COVID. And so Dan and I play a little game. We're like, who would you invite to dinner? Like, to have different perspectives. And so we said, who would we ask to sit on a committee next year? And so we had just a great group of people. I mean, I think really the strength of this book is the group of people that agreed to come together. And we had a panel, and then that panel turned into the book. But the first question on this panel was from a young person, and she said, "I'm doing text counseling with, I don't know who the person is on the other end. Do I need to keep case notes?" And there was this collective gasp from the group of people who were in that meeting. And we realized that there just needs to be some guidance. So I think you articulate this very well.
Really, and based on the questions, because we did this, we had two different town hall meetings, two different conferences. And really, we started to design this book as a way to help people do this well and not get in trouble doing it. Yes. Which was the goal. It's how could you do this, protect the client, protect yourself, protect the profession, and do this in a way that where everyone wins and you minimize loss, you minimize risk.
So we submitted the manuscript in February of 2020, and then COVID hit. And so ACA sent it all back to us and said, COVID's going to be a game changer. And so then we started to kind of watch and learn and made changes. And then it was published in December. And so of that same year.
Well, and at the same time, we had a small private practice down here in Central Texas. And when COVID hit, the building we were leasing our space is government owned, city owned. And so they just shut the building down. And they said, "You're welcome to use the building, but you have to manage the elevators. You have to come down 3 flights. You have to unlock all the doors to let people in." And so for each client on the hour, it was not going to work. Right. And we also had a lot of clients who were at health risk, They're fragile people. And so we
a
didn't
lot
want
of clients who were actually being quarantined.
Yeah.
And so that was,
so we just shut down our physical location, and we said, since we, generated the book on it, we might as well try it. Let's go into full-time practice with this.
Yes.
So
Practice what you preach.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
so we shut
We had
down,
to walk it.
went online. All of our clients came with us, stayed
Okay.
with us. And since then, we have gotten, so we are so busy with the number of clients that we actually have to refer people out because we just don't have space to fit them.
Right. So let me ask you, was working as faculty members at Capella helpful in that transition for you? What helped you kind of jumpstart that? Because I don't have that ability as a faculty member for myself. I didn't do a whole lot of online. I did some things with supervision and things along those lines, but never thinking about doing it full time. So was that an easy transition because of that?
It's really funny that you mentioned that, because we onboarded with Capella about the same time.
Oh.
Practice 2019.
Yeah.
Up until then, we'd been at brick and mortar institutions.
Okay.
Hybrid online stuff.
I think it was a combination of things. I think one of the things we did is we really took a student approach to this, and we talked to everyone that we could. And I think the group of people who wrote for this book were they had great expertise in their little area. And I think that's very, very important, is that collective expertise was really important. We learned a lot from our collaborators. We also, Dan, his background, he was the director of online services for the School of Education for Baylor University while we were in our PhD program. And then prior to that, he did electronic banking and a lot of the electronic technology pieces of that. So it's that beautiful marriage of technology and counseling together. And then I think really trying to pull from all those different worlds.
Yeah.
And really talking to a lot of people, because I feel like that even at the regulation standpoint, this is a place where we don't really know what to do with it. We're all learning as we go. So I think that really taking that approach, that there are a lot of things we don't know. And so who has that expertise, and who are we going to have a conversation with?
Well, and clients have taught us a lot.
Yeah.
In a very short amount of time.
No, but it's a great marriage between it. I'm gonna be honest. I was one of the ones that was kicking and screaming about telebehavioral health services.
Us too.
And but I see now. I don't think I saw before the pandemic. I won't say the pandemic made me aware, because I was doing supervision and some other things online, so I understood it. But I still had some hesitation because I was really, I'm like, I need you to be in front of me. I need to see all of you and really be there. How has that improved our counseling profession from your perspective?
I love that
Well,
question.
in a couple of ways. Something we've experienced, and I can speak just personally from my experience, because I also work with children. And so play therapy has been challenging. Doing play online, we've had to get very creative very quickly. But we have been able to continue seeing clients at their worst moments. Clients who are bedridden with COVID, isolated, they were quarantined, continue to have their counseling sessions. Just like with us right now, I can see your upper torso, I can see your facial expressions, I can hear your voice. And sometimes when I'm working with couples or families, I'll have them back away from the camera so I can see even more of them.
Okay. I hadn't thought about that so much, but yes.
You really don't lose as much as you might think you would lose. And
I think, it's really funny. I think at some point in time, we're going to probably have like studio, we're having lavaliers on so we can see the whole body and everything, right?
Exactly.
Lavalier mics.
Yes. Well, and that was the part of it was our biggest concern was, will people be okay with this?
Yes.
And will they be okay seeing us? And so we have to make sure we're framed up. We have plenty of light. They can see our environment. We can see their environment. But in this, again, there are a few things that are lost, but the benefits in our perspective has outweighed what few losses we have experienced. So I can't see the full body's presentation. No, I can't smell if they've got alcohol on them, if they're coming in inebriated. So I'm having to be mindful about what I'm watching for. But we've learned new things about cues. We've watched for social cues, because if someone enters the room, enters the space, if there's something else going on, we've learned to notice things that we really didn't notice in an in-person session, because we controlled the clinical space. Now we don't always control their clinical space. And so that's created a new set of skills for us.
I think one of the big questions too is to ask what are our options, what are our alternatives when we serve the client. One of our very first experiences with this modality was when we were doing supervision for some students who are working on Fort Hood back about 2016, 2017. And they were working with the chaplain's office. They had a parent or a spouse that was in theater in Afghanistan, and then they would have the rest of the family there on base. And they would use telehealth to maintain the family bond to help with the reintegration process once someone had returned. And so that was the first time when I was thinking, this is something that wouldn't be possible if the technology wasn't in place. And so I think that we're starting to see that. Then when COVID hit, it was really a game changer because we all got a crash course in Zoom. And I think that changed our culture as Americans, and worldwide, we're seeing changes because of this experience that we have with this modality. So I feel like that this has kind of been the watershed event that will change things.
So when you all came to be with writing this book, one of the things that you said and you've been talking about are the key players, or some of the folks that have helped you to kind of come along. I don't want you to be put on the spot with this, but are some of the key players who are part of this project with you all? Any particular chapters or anything that you want to speak to that are important for folks to really gravitate towards, to really make them go out and get this book?
Well, at the time that we wrote this book, we had the chair of the KCREP board, Jeff Parsons, contribute. Angela McDonald, who's the president of the State National Board Licensure Board Association.
Yeah.
Yes.
The two of them wrote a chapter together. And I think that was really a powerful chapter because they had kind of a bird's eye view of some things that were happening. Marty Gentius and Stephanie Martyr, they're both just, Martin has been in the field really thinking about how counseling and technology come together for years. So I think that they did a really nice chapter. Susan Belangi and Kia Hollis Griffith, they did a great chapter on looking at the cultural piece of millennials, looking at digital natives versus digital immigrants.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a great chapter.
We had the CEO of Motivo also write a chapter on distance supervision and what supervision elements. And we had also the founder of We Counsel, Harrison Tyner.
You and Harrison did
the technology chapter.
Piece.
Yeah,
that's really neat because you're also showing the interconnectedness of us outside of the counseling realm. There are other facets of us as a profession that really support us moving forward in this endeavor.
Yeah.
And then we have Jason Martin and Regina
Bordieri.
That did some chapters. And then we have some great appendices. And I think that if I were going to buy the book for nothing else, I think the appendices are great because Kenda Dalrymple is an attorney here in Texas who defends counselors when they go before the licensure board. And so she's a great person to say, don't do this because I don't want to have to represent you. And so she has some addendums in there that are kind of samples of some legal documents. And then Amber Hort-Helm, who is a PhD from Lindsey Wilson College in Kentucky, did a checklist of things as far as like kind of considering the fitness. So
client fitness for the use of telehealth.
Nice. That's great. So I'm going to pivot real quick. I got to ask you a question because it's just something that's on my mind. It looks like a propeller for an airplane just behind you there, Dan. Can you kind of give me the significance of this story? Because I got to know now why you have a wooden propeller behind you.
So that was actually in my bedroom as a child because my father was an aircraft mechanic during Korea. And so he had that as a kind of a souvenir of
something
his
he
military
picked up
service.
in his travels. Yeah.
And so he's older and was trying to kind of make sure that I have 5 brothers and sisters. Each of us got something that was significant from his life, and that's significant.
Nice. That's a neat story. Thank you. I mean, it was it was compelling. I needed to ask that question. All right, so back to it. So COVID-19 pandemic has impacted us, especially the mental health field, with regards to how people have been able to navigate through it. So there is this need for distance counseling and distance supervision. What are some of the things that you want to bring to the table with regards to distance counseling and distance supervision?
I would definitely say one of the more important elements is identifying all the stakeholders.
Okay.
Because when we started really writing this book and thinking about it and also doing it, we realized we have licensing authorities, not just here, but in other states. In different states, they define residency, the word residency, in different ways.
Yeah.
And so ensuring that where we are, where our client is, we're following all the rules. We also identify with the client, they're a stakeholder in this. We need to make sure that what is being offered to them, number one, they're appropriate for it. Number two, they know how to use it. And this is something that benefit them. The third thing we were looking at that really kind of caught us off guard was another stakeholder that we are now considering even more and more and integrating into this are the insurance providers.
Okay, yeah.
Who's paying your bills.
Yeah. I think that's such an important point, because what's legal to do and what's billable to do are very different things. And so making sure that you're in compliance with your governing bodies, but then also that each of your billing entities are going to have different rules and different guidelines.
I think it's important too to identify clearly that I wrote this also, and appears several places throughout the book, but we have our HIPAA standards, we have our FERPA standards, we also have high-tech standards.
Yeah.
And high-tech standards are equally important. And so while there's a federal entity, state entities don't always follow what federal says. And so when COVID first hit, the Department of Health and Human Services rolled back HIPAA requirements and said, use what you've got, we'll figure it out later. Texas said, I don't care what they say, you better be using HIPAA compliant stuff or you're going to be in trouble. And so states still recognize their independent authority to be able to enforce those rules and make sure that those privacy rules are in place. So knowing what your state's doing, knowing what the US government, federal government is wanting, there's a lot of balls to juggle, right? I mean, it's a lot of pieces and moving parts to it. But once you get your finger on the pulse of those different stakeholders, those different entities, it becomes easier just to follow up and stay with it.
It's a moving target.
It is a moving target.
And people need to be aware of that and open and adaptable to the fact that these things are coming down the pike. How do you help a person, though, who doesn't have that forward vision to kind of see that? How does this book support that?
I think one of the things that we're seeing a lot in the trainings that we do and the feedback that we're getting from readers is that when they look at this, they realize that there's so much that they hadn't thought about that they needed to know, and so much that we all still don't know. And so they realize it's a bigger question. Now, it's been also interesting. We've done a lot of guest lectures with universities, and the students have identified that, okay, now I kind of have a ladder to kind of figure out some of these pieces. And so I think that part of it is kind of an internal question about how comfortable you are with technology. And I think that this is kind of going to be a really interesting modality. So I think that the book has done a nice job of kind of helping people have a primer about, okay, these are the things I need to attend to.
That's really a big part of the book that's kind of integrated, woven throughout each chapter, or what are the right questions to ask? And so if you're considering doing this, what should you be asking your licensure board? What should you be asking your other licensure boards, your insurance companies? What kind of technology? And so in fact, in the technology chapter, I provide a couple of different checklists and some very interesting questions to ask all the varying providers that provide us our platforms and our network stability. So I get into some of the technology languaging just to kind of help people develop a schema for it.
There, almost every chapter has a list of questions. Like, these are things that you need to inquire about. These are things you need to know, because it's, we can put it in here and 5 minutes later it can be different.
Really, the book is about helping people ask better questions.
Okay. Now, is this your first edited book?
It is.
What did you learn about yourself in the process?
That I'm a bigger nerd than I realized. First of all, I didn't realize, especially when I was writing the chapter on technology, because we really, Harrison and I really get into the weeds about network integrity and ensuring that what you're doing is safe,
Okay.
and the safety protocols that are required for your computer, because there's the responsibility, the burden of responsibility falls back to the counselor.
Mm-hmm.
You're also equally responsible for what your client knows or doesn't know about how to use the system. So there's a little bit of training that goes in before you actually start the counseling process.
Right.
And same thing for supervisors. Supervisors have to know what the counselors are using that they're supervising and what the end looks like for the client.
Yeah.
And so to build a schema around that, I started discovering I'm more of a nerd than I care to admit. But it really helped me even learn more about what I need to be attending to.
I think also it reinforced the fact that we are so fortunate as counselors to work with amazing people in the field. I think that counseling has just some brilliant people. And I think that was really reinforced with this collaboration, is that we are really we're so lucky to be in the counseling field.
If we don't have,
I agree. I think that is so important to hear multiple voices. You know, we get these textbooks, and there's nothing wrong with them, from people who are, you know, just single authored and they did the work and they put their voice, but it's in their particular voice. But to have someone who is expert in this particular area write a chapter, in this particular area and write another chapter, you know, that really kind of lends to the wealth of information that people are getting, especially our students are getting, when it comes to hearing from some of the salient voices that are out there in our community. So when it all said and done, what is the most, I guess, the thing that you're most proud of with this book that's entered into the counseling field?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because we've been on the international scene for a while. We started our work with the military, working with the military and counselors who work with the military on family reintegration way back in 2011.
Okay.
We started traveling and training counselors across the globe. About that same time, we had a graduate student when we were still teaching at Lindsey Wilson College. A graduate student came in from Uganda. And during our conversations with him, I asked him, what do you want to do with this? And so he ended up building one of the largest, in fact, it is now the largest NGO in Uganda. And he's built hospitals and schools, counseling centers, farms. And he's continuing to just take and they're drilling wells and all this. And they've done this all over rural Uganda. And so we sit on the American side of the board of directors, and we have since the founding of it. So all proceeds from this book go to support that organization in Uganda.
Yeah, say that organization one more time so people can hear it.
Uganda Counseling and Support Services.
Yes.
They can go to ugandacss.org and learn more about it.
Yeah. And that also talks about the caring nature of counselors, right? That's what we do. We are selfless in putting ourselves forward, the things that we're doing, our expertise that supports others. That's why we do what we do, right? Yeah.
And the impact that community is having, they have integrated mental health facilitators into the community, and it's helped in so many ways. And educating young girls has given them so many opportunities to even delay marriage and make more choices about their lives. And so we're really, really excited that they're able to do that.
Nice. So I wanted to ask you, with regards to telebehavioral health and client records and supervisory records, what are some recommendations that you have when it comes to people in this new stage of development, this new evolution of counseling? How do they stay on top of their records?
That's such a great question. I think everything that we do as counselors, all of the great pristine records that we are supposed to keep, all of that is the same. I think in addition, we want to document where we're connecting with that person each time. I think making sure that we know the location of the person in front of us is absolutely paramount. I think that's number one. And then number two is having connections to the emergency services in that area. And then three is having an emergency contact for that person that's within 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So that if something happens, not just if they're a harm to self or others, but also if someone has a heart attack or a medical condition during the session, that we have a plan in place. And so having an emergency action plan, having thought through all of that, that all should be a part of the documentation from the very beginning.
It seems so daunting. And I would ask you, I can see how it's so different from having a brick and mortar experience versus having this online experience. What do practitioners need to know going into that? How do they get there? Because what you just said, you just rattled it off, right? But there are people who may not be in the know about all those different things. How do we get them up to speed on being able to know that they need to know about emergency services, that they need to be able to have maybe someone 5 to 10 minutes away that can go in and really intervene if there's a necessary need, right?
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think this is a specialization, just like anything else. If you were going to work with clients who were experiencing trauma, you would go and get the very best training on that area. I think this is a specialization. So I think one of the things that we need to make sure that we're doing on an ongoing basis is that we're engaging in continuing education. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're also trying to find new and better ways of integrating this into curriculum for new counselors. When we were in the midst of the pandemic, I told my students, you're the first generation of counselors who will be formally trained in this in their grad program. And I think that's something that we're going to need to continue to grow and develop. So I think that's the first part.
Well, the book also just talks about how to become more intentional about that. Intentionality is going to be huge. Yes. And they can take resources from the book and create their own checklists. And so then it becomes integrated into your routine. So when I first get on, typically with new clients on our website, we have a link on about telehealth, and we have a list of things that's a checklist for them to go through to help maintain control of their clinical space at home. Great. So once we go through that, then, hey, where are you today? And hey, what else is going on? And so you learn to integrate those questions in at the very beginning. You're jotting things down just so that you can make sure those do end up in the case notes.
Give that website for them.
And so, yeah, in fact, we nothing to us is, we don't own it all. This has been a combination of things. And so if they go to www.consultpax.com, that's our website for our practice.
The list
and the list of items, and it's interesting because it started out as 5 or 6 items and now it's up to 11 items. The only thing I ask is if anyone goes to that about telehealth link and they see things, if they see something that's not there, let us know so we can add it because we want this to be a resource as well.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. Can you kind of talk about that in terms of there's a time where people are afraid to ask questions like what you're saying. And I know that has been on a person-to-person, face-to-face type of environment. That doesn't change, and it's even that much more important to ask certain questions on an online, platform. So maybe after the break, you could kind of talk about the importance of really stepping up and asking those very sometimes difficult questions, so that you do no harm, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back after this break, and we'll kind of delve into some of those topic areas. All right. Wonderful. This is the Voice of Counseling. I'm Dr. S. Kent Butler. We'll be back in a moment.
Counselors help positively impact lives by providing support, wellness, treatment. We're working to change lives. We are creating a world where every person has access to the quality, professional counseling, and mental health services needed to thrive.
Welcome back to the Voice of Counseling. This is Dr. S. Kent Butler, and we're here with the Williamsons. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what counselors need to know and how they can navigate working with their clients. And so we left off kind of talking about some of those questions that you ask, especially from an online perspective, that may not be something that's done face to face. There's an importance of asking questions, and sometimes new practitioners, students especially, are kind of hesitant to ask questions. Can you kind of talk about that and how they can get past some of that, hesitancy when it comes to asking some very pertinent or very difficult questions?
Certainly. One of the elements I recommend establishing just early in the relationship is letting the client know up front, if you're using telehealth services and this is your modality for them, that you're going to probably ask them some questions fairly regularly. And so if I notice something different about the space, if I notice a difference in you when we're talking, I might pause, I might stop for a second, and then I might ask you a question about that. So, and it's going to be about maintaining a greater situational awareness than you typically do when you're in a counseling session, because in a brick and mortar facility, you can have more control over the clinical space. Well, when you're doing telehealth, you have control over your clinical space, but not theirs. And
Right.
so
like asking about the propeller.
Yeah, exactly. They might, yeah. And so, well, and with that too, it's oh, I noticed you're in a different room today. So tell me where you are today. Because again, it's critically important to understand where that person might be.
We even have a signal. I have some clients that we know that there are people who are, the word his clients use are ear hustling. And so there's someone listening. And so when we have a client who is in a situation like that, we even have a signal where they'll kind of pull their ear. And that way they kind of convey to us, okay, we need to, someone's listening. And so we need to kind of stop this line of questioning for a little while.
Yeah.
Okay.
So working out some cues ahead of time between, and just some nonverbal forms of communication.
So how does that kind of play out with confidentiality?
That's
it really helps preserve that confidentiality.
Yeah.
Because with one of my clients, I have her do the old tug on the eye, like someone just walked in the room. And so I will stop asking, or we'll stop the conversation that we're talking about at the time. And we'll have tips. Sometimes we'll have a default conversation to turn to. And we'll turn back to, let's talk about work again. And then once that person leaves, then they'll give me the clear, it's all clear now because that person has now left my space. We can go back and talk about what we were talking about.
It makes me wonder, do we tell clients that they should be sitting with their back to the door so that we see the door if it opens or something like that?
I talked to a counselor the other day, and she does a beautiful thing. She says she works a lot with young people, and she says, let me see your room. And she'll have them take the camera around the room so she can kind of, and she's checking to make sure that the client is alone there in that space and that there's not anything that is inappropriate. I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to be very clear about what constitutes a clinical space. Yes. And so there's a great definition that comes out of an agency in Austin that says a clinical space is that you're in a room, it has a door, the door is closed, and a sound machine of some kind is on. So that could be a proper sound machine, or that could be a radio outside the door, something to drown out sound. And I think even we've been very creative about this. And so we have clients that will meet in bathrooms or in parked cars or in walk-in closets. So I think that sometimes a clinical space, we think, oh, well, that's very fancy. I think it's about functionality rather than about having to be pretty.
Well, so the point there is it's about the relationship and getting this person through whatever they're going through, not the settings, so to speak, that we should have to think beyond the setting, the traditional piece that we normally think we need to be in as counselors.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And that really, safety does become an issue as well. One of the things we ask of all our clients is if you are going to meet in the car, let's make sure the car's not moving. And if you are in your home environment, that you're safe. And again, this modality is not the best for all types of clients. Right. The vast majority of clients that we do see with their presenting concerns, this works very well. And
so you made me think of like someone who might be in a domestic violence situation.
Exactly.
And how, now you got me thinking back to 5 or 10 minutes away. No, maybe a minute away, right? If something was to go down, that's really interesting.
One of the things we take in when we have clients fill out the intake paperwork is we ask for their emergency contact person, and we have them fill out the appropriate release forms. So, and we also have them have a conversation with that person saying, oh, by the way, you're my phone a friend. In case something happens to me, my counselor is going to call you because they're going to notice I just fell out of my chair. We get the person's doctor, whoever their doctor is, their physician, local hospital, and then law enforcement to do a wellness
Which is a
check.
different approach even there, because in traditional counseling, we typically try not to, we try to keep our identity away from the fact that this person may be seeing a counselor. It shifts with the online component.
And if I had a client who fell out, I would just, if I did call law enforcement. So if I were working with you, for example, you fell out of your chair, and I say, hello, Dr. Butler, are you there? And you're not responding.
Right.
I already have your release and your permission by the documentation you signed, and we've had a conversation about it. I'm going to call law enforcement, or I'm going to call your phone a friend. I'm going to say, I was just on with Kent. Something happened. He fell out of his chair.
Wow.
He's responding. I don't even have to tell them who I am.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I was just in a meeting with them. They fell out of their chair. They're not responding. Would you go check on them?
And I think
So, now I'm just being foolish right now, but, you made me think of, those things that people wear around their neck that you get, the ads advertised on TV, whatever have you. So some counselor needs to, somebody's going to steal this idea, right? So some counselor needs to have this little button that, that your clients have to wear when they're in the session with you, that they push if they should happen to fall out of the chair. I've fallen, I can't get up type situation.
It's their butler button.
Yeah. The butler button.
So I need to find a way to put that on, what is it, copyright that?
Patent it. And that's the goal, really, and it's all about that safety piece, right? That safety. Or can we help that client maintain their own safety?
And knowing your client, because maybe if they had issues with law enforcement, maybe EMS is a better place to call, kind of working out that safety plan ahead of time. And then part of the screening is knowing, is this a client who struggles with emotional stability or impulsivity? What kind of level of care? We have a very moderate level of care agency. We're not going to work with someone who needs a really high level of care. So I think all of those considerations when we're evaluating a client for suitability. And then the other thing is that this isn't a one or kind of situation. More and more counselors that we know are doing some sessions in telehealth and some sessions in person.
Yes.
And so we have some other.
That's you talk about changing hats. That's a shift as well, right?
If you think about everything you do in your traditional setting, you're still having to do all those things. Now you're just adding some additional skills, additional things to make sure you
be competent, competent in what you're doing, and to make sure that you're doing no harm. Right. So what are some special ways in which clients can benefit from telemental health?
They can be absolutely just bedridden, sick, and still have a counseling session.
Yeah. During
I gotta
COVID,
say that's number one.
It was really interesting because Dan was working with a child and I was working with the parent, and the child had been quarantined but was the only member of the family who had tested positive. And so one of the things that we were able to do is work with them during quarantine to figure out how to interact. So I think during times when clients would normally just cancel, I think that continuity of care. Yeah. And then the other piece of that is that being able to have accessibility. And I really feel like that this is a social justice issue.
The social justice piece. I was wondering about that. Yeah. Especially with somebody who doesn't have the capability to be online, but needs your services.
Yes. So Georgia Hope and the Christian Appalachian Project are both areas that work in rural areas and have done a beautiful job of helping clients to figure out how to access this and to help them connect when they're in rural areas that wouldn't otherwise have access. So I think that they've been a little creative. I think that a lot more people have mobile phones than they have internet and computers. And so they did some beautiful work in that area. I think the directors and counselors there have been fantastic.
The number of people I've even seen in the homeless population who have a cell phone.
Yes.
They have a cell phone. They can get to the counseling session.
So that's interesting in and of itself. There's one thing to be on a laptop in a stationary space. How have what do we need to know about working with somebody who might be in a counseling relationship with us using their cell phone?
I've had clients do that who were in transit. They were either moving or they were traveling around the state and they couldn't get a clear Wi-Fi signal, but they could still get a phone signal. As long as we, and again, as long as we can try to help them find that space where they can have a private conversation with us. The protocol that we use, the program we use, has an end-to-end encryption. So if anyone does intercept the signal, it's garbled. It doesn't make sense. And so some encryption, and really in that chapter in the book, I really go into the weeds about the technology part and things to consider. Okay. And it's not just written from the high-end user. It creates a vocabulary. And so it really helps define that vocabulary. So so a person who has no technology experience could actually pick up this book, read that chapter and go, oh, that's what that means. Okay, well, then this is for the question I need to ask to make sure that if I do have a client who's using only a cell phone, that's a great question to ask whoever the provider.
And it leaves no questions unturned, right? People know from reading that chapter just the various ways that things may come up. So
I'll say so far, because technology moves fast.
Yeah. It does.
I think we're all learning. I think it starts the conversation. So what we've noticed is that with programs like Siri and any kind of listening voice activation on your phone, any kind of listening device, like we have things like Discord that people connect with. I think any of that, no matter what your technology, you have to be aware of. And I think cell phones are probably even more complex because we're working with that voice activation every day.
We have to turn off and be aware of turning off those things. Alexa, Google, all these other things.
So
right. Because I've been in the middle of situations where I'm doing something and I don't even realize I say something that's close to saying something and she'll chime in or whatever happened. Even with the online piece, there's sometimes distractions from little bells and whistles that kind of go off when a new text message or email comes in or something along those lines, and how that could be distracting in some regards, right?
Well, and in our checklist on our website, that's one of the things we ask people, we remind them to do is go through, ensure those things aren't turned on. Make sure they're turned off for temporary, just for a short period of time.
If they're technologically savvy enough to be able to do it though, right?
Exactly. Well, and most of our clients, because they have the technology in the house, because they have that Alexa, that Google device or whatever it is, they know how to unplug it or turn it off.
Well, I would have to go get my daughter. She's 9. In some cases, I'm being very honest, I sometimes don't have that capability. So what are some of the top 4 technical considerations that counselors need to address when offering behavioral health services?
Such a great question. Number 1, HIPAA compliance. All the federal compliance requirements. So HIPAA high tech, if they are signing on with a company, and this is covered in the chapter in detail, and whoever is going to be providing that service, whether it's an EHR, an electronic health record, or a video conferencing platform, they need to make sure they get the BAA, the Business Associate Agreement with that entity, because that outlines all the different levels of liability and vicarious liability.
Right?
Shared liability. And so it really describes what that means. Another thing I recommend that everyone get when they're talking about or reviewing or looking for a platform is to ask for the white papers. Now that's some language that a lot of people don't know about. The white papers go in and describe HIPAA compliance, how they do it, their encryption, how they do it. And then what you do is you find a guy who's a tech nerd and you buy him a pizza and have him sit down and explain it all to you, because you want to understand how the technology works, how they maintain the HIPAA compliance, how they do encryption, and getting your hands on that. And then asking that provider, do you have a sandbox version that I can get in and play with? And I can play with it with a colleague or a friend and see what both ends look like. Know how to use that technology before you just jump on and start trying it. Network integrity is huge. One of the things I still recommend to a lot of people, I don't know how many people remember these, an Ethernet cable.
Ethernet.
Yeah. If you are not certain about your Wi-Fi security in your place, wherever you're working, cable in, because then you're not worried about the Wi-Fi signal. Cabling in with an Ethernet cable helps eliminate some of that risk.
This might sound like a crazy question, but I got to ask, right? if you use the Ethernet, and is it less chance of your Wi-Fi going out? You know what I'm saying?
It's more stable.
It is much more stable. Yeah.
So like if in a situation where your Wi-Fi might go out in the area, your Ethernet may not.
Well, it depends on your internet service provider.
Okay.
If the internet's down for the area, then you can have an issue with just getting any.
Okay.
Wi-Fi,
So being hardwired doesn't really necessarily help you if the system has gone down in your area.
Yeah. No, if the system's gone down in the area, you're out of luck.
Okay. And so the other question I have for you is, you suspect that there's might be some type of a confidentiality breach or something along those lines. What do you as an online counselor do?
Well, if you have confirmation that there's been a breach either on your end or by one of the service providers, for example, your payment processor, whoever's providing the video conferencing platform, your EHR, you are mandated. You have to report that to your clients who their information has been used through that system. You have to make a mandatory report to them and everybody else. And so I would definitely say, be mindful. This is not something we step into lightly. We want to make sure that those who are using, we are reviewing with them the last breach they had, what kind of security checks they do regularly for integrity. What does their regular reporting reveal? Because if you're using a platform that has been breached a couple of times within the past couple of years, you probably don't want to go with that provider.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to have to call your client and say, okay, look, I know we've been using this, but now
because then you're actually become more liable if you're using something that you already have been suspect of, in terms of having some doubts about their ability. What's your recommendation for a social media policy for counselors?
I think everyone needs to have a social media policy for a couple of reasons. One is I think there are legal issues involved, but I think even more so, I think the relationship. We're so used to using social media that there are some cultural elements that we don't even think about that our clients assign meaning to social media use. And so we have to make sure we clearly articulate in our social media policy that I'm not going to accept a friend request and I'm not going to do certain things. And I think we need to be very clear about that and help our clients to really understand that this is for their protection, not because it's rejection. And then I think also I think there's a social media example in the appendices of the book that the attorney put out. And part of that is that we need to really be very clear that we're going to separate our personal online self with our professional online self. So those social media platforms are very separate when we're out there, and that we never intermix that, because it's a really, really easy way for us to breach confidentiality for our client unintentionally.
Well, and these policies really, in our opinion, should be baked into the informed consent right up front. And then another recommendation I make too, in addition to that, so many of these different social media platforms cross-communicate with your online purchasing apps. And so you think Amazon, Facebook, and if you ever are curious about it, open Facebook, then open Amazon, look for Bob Ross socks or something. The painter guy, and are put in Happy Trees socks, and then watch your Facebook feeds. You'll notice the advertisements start to reflect those elements. And so there can be cross-browser traffic. And so one of the things we've been talking to a lot of folks about is, if you have a computer you use for work, only use it for work. Don't use it for social media at all. If you have a phone that you use for work, use it for work. No social media, no other things.
Wow. That's good. That's good to know. So listen, talking with the Williamsons goes by really quickly. We have come to the end of our time, but I have one more question I want to ask you all. How do you stay up to date? How do we get counselors to stay up to date? You just mentioned that it's always evolving. Your book is out of date probably already now that it's in print. So how do we stay up to date?
That's a great question.
I would recommend reaching out to your state organization, as well as your licensure board. See if there is a listserv that you can join to receive regular legislative updates. That's one of the things that I've been really proud of Texas. There are a couple of different listservs that we belong to that we get that information really, really quite quickly. Staying up with licensing laws, staying up with, the federal standards as well. And it just becomes a method of being intentional.
Don't be afraid to engage in the conversation.
Right.
Engage in the conversation officially through your professional development, but also engage in the conversation just like you would any other aspect of counseling. I think sometimes if we've been in the field for a while, we kind of stray away from technology conversations. Don't be afraid to engage.
Excellent. Well, you heard it here first from the Williamsons. And I thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today and sharing your wisdom. It's been great. It flew by. We try to make this a counseling hour, and it flew by. And so we already know that it works, that tele-mental health works, and your book is phenomenal. And we want folks to go out there and get it and start practicing in the best competent way possible as counselors. So thank you all for being here today.
Thanks
Really
for having
So
us.
much.
Yeah.
And this has been The Voice of Counseling. I'm Dr. S. Kent Butler. We'll see you next time.